The day that I see people like Krystal and Kyle and Hassan and Emma Vigeland, the day that I see them making videos, honestly exploring potential explanations for why they struggle with older voters and like black voters, is the day that I'm going to feel so much more optimistic about the future of progressive politics in this country. If you could plant those seeds when you have those conversations with Kyle and Krystal, if you could just plant those seeds for me, you know, maybe it could start to like bear fruit, and maybe we could start to see some kind of practical sort of addressing of these issues. So you definitely want the progressive wing to be in charge of like the Democratic Party, right? Like you would like to see them in the leadership position at some point?
As a general policy preference, like my instinct is, and my personal preference is, I'd rather have a speaker AOC than a speaker Tom Suozzi. Right. Or Speaker Jared Golden. I'd rather, like, policy, I prefer their position, and I think they fight better and harder. So I think that if you held the gun to my head and said, in the age of fascism or rising authoritarianism, do you trust progressives more or, you know, more centrist liberals? And I would say progressives.
Yeah. So in order for that to happen, progressives would have to win more seats so that they could actually, have the votes to advance someone like AOC to be speakers. So that would necessarily involve like more electoral success. And so like you didn't weigh 100%. In as much in the conversation that I was having with Isco last night. I just wanted to kind of gather your thoughts. Like, I don't think we're too far apart. I mean, you know, with the, my only concern with you, and we'll get to that in a second, but like, as far as the Ezra Klein thing, which was kind of the catalyst for the conversation, I disagreed with Ezra simply because of the example he offered. And I think that's where most of the pushback was. I don't think that we need to cede any ground on abortion because abortion is a winning issue even in red states. As long as it's on the ballot referenda, it sweeps in Kansas, Kentucky. Conservatives are on the back foot always in 2025 on abortion. So I thought that specific example was kind of a weak one. Like, no, I understand being willing to back and promote more socially conservative candidates to flip red seats, but only on areas where we have to give ground. I refuse to give ground on shit we don't have to give ground on. So we don't have to give ground on abortion, and I see no evidence to support that. Well, so I disagree with him there. But the broader principle of, like, you know, if we have to field candidates who are, you know, more openly outspoken about, you know, trans people in sports, something like that, these like niche culture issues, which, you know, they are difficult for Democrats in particularly swing states and swing districts, then yeah, of course, if that's the difference between a majority and a minority. So at the state level, for the most part, I think abortion is a losing issue for Republicans. But if you get down to the district level, then surely you could find probably a lot of districts in this country where the majority of the constituents are pro-life. So like, I agree with you holistically that the Democratic Party doesn't need to, you know, drastically or even at all, like reshape their platform on the issue of abortion. Like I, as a Democrat, I think like not only is it morally the correct thing to do, but politically it's the correct thing to do to have like protecting people's reproductive rights should be a plank of the Democratic Party in the post-Roe era. But if there was an opening in a, you know, red district where abortion was less popular, then I think that's what Ezra Klein was speaking to. But I'm not even I think that's an interesting conversation to have about like the Ezra Klein thing. I think like if nothing else, Ezra, like what he says certainly generates a lot of really interesting discussion. So I appreciate that about him. I more wanted to hone in on, you know, like I want progressive policies to be a thing that we have in the future. Like I definitely lean to the left of the median voter. My issue, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on this, is like when I look at the progressive movement right now, I don't feel very confident. And there's a reason for this. And I think like the thing that makes me feel a lot less confident about progressives right now is that there doesn't seem, and I mentioned it last night, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this specifically. Like there doesn't seem to be any kind of reflection on electoral losses that extends beyond well, it was AIPAC's fault, or it was the establishment's fault, or, you know, it was the billionaire's fault.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you and sympathize with you that in my experience, like prominent progressive commentators, including ones I really respect, like Sam Cedar, for example, not just Emma Vigeland, for whom I've lost a great deal of respect over the past year, that there's an instinct, like literally progressive candidates are perfect. They are flawless. They run flawless campaigns. It's just like external forces conspire to screw them. And I don't think that, I think that's an incredibly reductive. I think that's as reductive as Cenk saying, you know, again, just give him control of government for 24 hours and he'd, you know, snap his fingers and solve all the ills of the world. I have a deep distrust of people who, you know, in personal relationships, business relationships, or political relationships, who believe that they are perfect, that there was no room for improvement, that they did everything correct, and they failed consistently simply because of the universe conspiring against them. I'm deeply skeptical of that, and I think that that's a problem.
Like Bernie is a really obvious example, but I feel like we can point to something a little bit more recent. So, you know, when we look at like Jamal Bowman and Cory Bush, when they both lost their primaries, all I saw from commentators when they were doing postmortems on why they lost those races, all I ever saw was like AIPAC spending. And, you know, like it was like a rigged system. And it's not that there's no truth to the fact that big money interests can influence politics in ways that, you know, people like you and I, and probably most people in my chat, would abhor.
Yeah.
It's not that that's not true, or it's not that there's no kernels of truth there, but in the case of like Cory Bush and Jamal Bowman, both of their numbers had slumped into the double digit negatives before AIPAC even spent a dime in either of those races. And, you know, there were analyses done on like why their support dropped. And do you know what caused like a great deal of damage to both of those candidates?
Was it their position on Gaza?
Not like that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was actually not voting for the infrastructure bill, which not only was that not popular with their own constituents, it was not popular with like local groups and local unions who saw that bill as, you know, like a massively beneficial to them, to their interests. And so, you know, losing support from the local unions, that is going to like damage you electorally. I mean, that's a really big thing. Like that's a huge contributing factor to why they lost those races. And yet I didn't see anyone talking about that. And like, this is something that really deeply concerns me about progressive politics right now, because I feel like until that changes, they're just kind of stay stagnant and plateau, and they're never going to get the kind of seats that they would need to elevate someone like AOC to the House Speaker's position. Like, unless this changes, like nothing's going to change. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, again, I totally agree that I detect a lack of introspection and humility that comes from progressive candidates. I would probably say I haven't read Kamala Harris's 107 Days yet, but from the excerpts I have read and from the commentary I've seen around it, including from more liberal people, they actually kind of level the same accusation against her, which is that, you know, it was this group, it was this thing, it was this going on, and not like a failure of her and her campaign. As a general proposition, though, I am deeply skeptical of people who don't engage in introspection and who blame everything on external conspiracies. It's just, like red flag for me when I was dating was, you know, if I would go on a date with somebody, or, you know, at whatever point, like history and past came up, and it was all, if I ever heard, you know, a girl I was dating say, you know, yeah, my last relationship ended terribly, you know, he was just a blanket, you know, he was just a piece of shit, and like all these things. And it's like, if I detect the sentiment that you did nothing wrong and you were simply a victim of, you know, a creature of pure evil, I just don't buy that. It certainly hasn't been the case in my failed relationships. I fucked up a lot. I made a lot of mistakes, you know, and so it's the same thing in politics. And I take your point that if there's never even an incentive to engage in introspection. You just default to, oh, it was the money, it was the institutional barriers. Now, I mean, maybe that's the case. Maybe they played a role. Maybe they played a bigger role than whatever mistakes you may or may not have made. But if you refuse to even engage on that level, like, yeah, I alienated a lot of my constituency by refusing to vote for the infrastructure bill. And in hindsight, I probably should have taken a different position on this, or better explained my position to my constituency as to why I oppose that particular, like, whatever. But if that's not what you're doing, that's a problem.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy, by the way. That's like a perfect analogy for this, because that should be a red flag to like anybody that's in my chat right now that's out there like dating people. You know, what Jessiah said is so fucking true. If you meet someone and all they talk about their previous relationships and they put the blame squarely on their partners, that is an enormous red flag. Because I've been in relationships where I would say probably, I don't know how to quantify it perfectly, but like most of the blame was on the other person. But even in those relationships, I fucked up many, many times and contributed to a really bad kind of situation. And so, when you get older, I think it's easier to do that kind of reflection, but it's totally relevant when it comes to politics. And yeah. I just like, that's the frustration that I have right now, because I feel like there's this feedback loop and it's so deeply ingrained. And I think it really kind of solidified and crystallized after the 2016 debacle, because certain narratives formed as a result of the way that primary race played out. And I feel like we're still dealing with the damage that perception caused, that, the perception that it was like literally stolen from Bernie. And now people have just gotten in this habit now, and it just happens every single time. And
hey, sorry, I dropped out for like 5 seconds because I was closing windows because I can't stand to have them up, and I accidentally closed out Discord. Oh, so I the last 5 seconds. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just saying, like, I feel like the narrative really crystallized after 2016 that there are forces outside of your ability to control as a progressive, and it's this kind of perpetual victimhood that drives me insane. And I think, like, we should have honest conversations about the ways that different systems and different private interest groups and big money groups influence politics. You should have those discussions and identify like what's going on that contributes to losses. But at some point, I get really tired of hearing, it's not fair. Like, if I put it like if I could construct like a crude sports analogy. Like, let's say there's this one basketball team, and this one basketball team has a player that is like 7'5", and then you have two hypothetical opposing teams. And one of the teams, their strategy is to stand around and look at each other and say, well, this is just clearly not fair. This guy's got such an advantage. We're not going to be able to beat this guy. And then the other team are constructing a plan to actually specifically like target that one player to make him less of a factor. Like, which team do you think has a better chance of actually winning? So like, I get the latter. What I'm saying is, like, I think like I need to start hearing from progressives, like, plans, like concrete plans. Okay, we know AIPAC spends a lot of money. We know that donors have a lot of influence. We know that in many ways, these systems and institutions are an uphill battle for progressives. Okay, I understand that. What is the plan? Like, we need to, like, at some point you have to understand, like, you have to accept that this is the framework that I have to operate in. I have to find a way to be successful in that framework. Donald Trump did to remarkable success in 2 out of the last 3 elections. He beat the money. Like, they outspent him 3-1, 4-1 in both the races in 2016 and 2024. And he almost pulled it off in 2020 as well, where he was outspent once again. So it can be done. Like, I just need to start hearing plans. If all I'm hearing is like, oh, it's just the whole thing is rigged and it's not fair, I just don't have a lot of faith that progressives are going to be able to like win more seats in the future. And I think, and I'll finish up. I think this really needs to come. I'm not putting it on you, but like, I think this really needs to come from like progressives in alternative media. I think they have an enormous amount of influence. I just want to start seeing like more of them. Like, if you could start, like, if you could plant those seeds when you have those conversations with Kyle and Krystal, if you could just plant those seeds for me, maybe it could start to like bear fruit, and maybe we could start to see some kind of practical sort of addressing of these issues. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So again, a couple of things. I'm curious, and I assume that you expect introspection from all candidates, not progressive. So if you read 107 Days, again, this is a recurring criticism I've heard. I've not read this book, is that Kamala goes scorched earth on Biden, on, you know, on this group, on that group, on whatebe and blaming everybody.
So I haven't read the book either, and if that was the case, then yeah, I would be really disappointed and discouraged.
Right.
It would make
because you agree that when a candidate fails, regardless if they're progressive or liberal, at least some of it has to be because they fucked up.
Yeah,
right.
This is a universal principle that should apply to every candidate. Yeah.
Just just like I agree, Jamal Bowman fucked up. We obviously agree Kamala Harris fucked up too. She wasn't a perfect person was foiled by the exigencies of the external universe, right?
I mean, listen, I think like I don't know about you, but I don't really blame her for that election loss. Personally.
I don't assign her the majority of the blame, but I don't think that she was like we hear this quote from a lot of people. You know, she ran as perfect of a campaign as she possibly could. You know, I mean, she made every right decision. It just wasn't enough in the end. I don't believe that that's the case.
Yeah, I should be more precise. I don't put most of the blame on her.
Agreed. Nor do I. Yeah. Again, the person I don't know if you agree. I blame Biden more than anybody. I blame. But I'm also different too, because I also blame voters. And like I hear even commentators like the Majority Report and certainly the Young Turks and so many other people. You can't blame the voters. No, the fucking voters have agency too, and we have a deeply irrational electorate. And of course, if I were a candidate for office, I could never say that, but I'm not a candidate. So yeah, I think like the media, Biden, Kamala, the voters. I think there was like plenty of blame to go around, but I agree with you that Kamala is not mostly to blame. But yeah, no, again, I totally agree with you that the principle is something I need to hear that from candidates and from movements who fail. The Democratic Party writ large, like right now, we're going through a period of introspection. We've went up against Trump 3 times in presidential elections. He's beaten us 2 out of the 3, and that's something we're talking about, given that, yes, he has unique strengths, but also, unique vulnerabilities that previous Republican presidents and presidential candidates have not had. I mean, he's a 34-time convicted felon. He's been, found civilly liable for sexual abuse. The judge called it rape. I mean, and we failed twice. So no, I totally agree with that. And it does frustrate me when I hear from the candidates or from people who support the candidates that, again, they were perfect. It's just the rest of the world failed them. And what's interesting is I watched this morning while I was doing research. So Cenk had a conversation in the bonus episode of the Young Turks, and I think it might be posted separately. I'll try to find you the link, with Mike Nellis. Do you know who Mike Nellis is? The white guys for Harris. He's been on Piers Morgan. Good looking guy, like heavier set guy. He's been on Fox News. He's been on Tommy Lauren, all in the past several months. Okay, you should check him out. All right, because he has this Substack called Endless Urgency. I've interviewed him twice. Sharp guy, just no nonsense, no bullshit, no muss, no fuss, and he doesn't have a problem disagreeing with anybody. So he goes on this thing with Cenk Uygur, and like to compare and contrast, Tommy Vitor of Pod Save America was on a couple of weeks before, and Cenk tried to have a friendly conversation, but he was grilling Tommy Vitor about how much Biden sucked and how much Democrats sucked.
Wait, how did I miss this? Wait, what the fuck? Where's that video?
I'll send you both links when we're done.
You're saying Cenk and Tommy Vitor were sparring a bit?
Yeah, but it wasn't much of a spar because Tommy mostly folded. He pushed back a little bit. There was some token. It was here. I got the link right now.
I definitely want to watch that. I didn't know that happened.
Yeah, but I want you to temper your expectations because Cenk dominates the conversation for the most part. But I saw this too. Like Tommy also interviewed Stephen A. Smith, whom I also loathe. I think Stephen A. Smith's a fucking clown. I think he's hilarious when he's, bantering with Kevin Hart about sports. I'm sure he's a great sports commentator.
He makes political discourse dumber. That's what I don't like about him. Yeah.
It's really frustrating. So there was the Tommy Vitor one. Who did I say it was? Mike Nellis. Let me just do this right now because I will forget as soon as I hop off here.
Did he blame the donor class?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. Is it on TYT or is it on Pod Save? Or is it on?
No, it's no. So Tommy Vitor was on Jenks. I just linked it to you. It's on TYT's The Conversation. Mike Nellis has nothing to do with Pod Save America.
Oh, okay. I definitely want to watch this. Jesus.
Okay. So the one with Mike Nellis is like a members only video. So you will not be able to see it yet. I'm trying to think if there's a way around that.
Does it concern you that someone in my chat just commented, and I agree, that the Pod Save bros are caving a little too much? Have you noticed that?
It frustrates me. So again, I was pretty unfamiliar with most of Hassan's stuff until everything happened a couple of months ago that made me want to stop live streaming. And I have since become a bit more familiar. You sent us that text with some of the shit that Hassan said about Biden on, I don't know if it was Gaza or if it was
trans issues.
It was trans people. Yeah. So when I saw that that Hassan is speaking at the Crooked Con thing, the thing, I'm disappointed there. And they've interviewed, John Lovett, and I like Tommy. I like John, and I like both Johns, and I like Tommy. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I can guarantee that I would have done a better job in their position. John Lovett gave a fairly tough interview, I think, all things considered, to Hassan, pushing back on some shit. Yeah. So I understand the trying to court this wildly influential figure who is nominally more adjacent to our political project than the opponent's political project. But I think after a while, you just got to say, okay, if you're still doubling down that there would have been no difference and one is just as bad as the other, when that was evidently not the case on any issue, including Gaza, especially trans people and trans issues, then I don't know how, I don't know why I would waste my time, effort, and energy trying to break bread with you at this point. I am disappointed about that sort of thing. And I was a little disappointed in their conversation with Cenk there, but I'm not like furious, like grabbing a pitchfork, because I understand what they are trying to do. Yeah. And I do think it's a noble mission. They're trying to redirect Cenk. They're trying to redirect Hassan in more politically productive ways. And I just don't think it's working.
I think that's what they're doing too. Yeah. And I think you're right. Yeah. I don't know if it's working, but here's what I think is going on. I think there's like a mismatch, like a really big mismatch that is sort of distorting the conversation. Because I think what Pisco said last night when he said that all the energy and like forward motion is with progressives right now, I think in a sense he was correct, but I think where he was correct was in the online space. And he even said, that it's becoming more and more common to see progressive commentators. Like, do you remember that part? Like he said it's like, that's where all the energy is, basically when it comes to like content, like progressive politics dominate the online space. But the problem is that creates this perception that doesn't necessarily like match the reality, because the reality is that they have like largely been stagnant in recent years. And so there's all that energy and excitement online, but it's not necessarily translating to wins. And I think it could, if we started having just way more honest conversations about why these electoral losses keep happening, because progressives are at quite a disadvantage when it comes to, especially when it comes to like primary contests, because they're most popular with like younger voters, right? And those voters do not vote at the same rate that older voters vote. And on top of that, progressives are their candidates tend to not do as well with like black voters and Hispanic voters. There's exceptions to this when you get granular with it, but broadly, like these are demographics that they tend to struggle with. Also with like older people, as I just said a moment ago. And like, these are really important demographics to the Democratic Party. Like if you would rather do well with older voters or younger voters, you're going to pick older voters every time because they vote.
They're more
twice the rate or whatever.
They vote more. And this is why, I've said this before, that I think politics is transactional. I think we all have to be candid about that as much as we can possibly be. Obviously, candidates themselves are put in an awkward position because you can't demand, it's the expectation you can't demand or expect things from the voters. But, as commentators, we can, which is that if you want to wield influence over a particular candidate, you have to be willing to praise them when they do something right or do something that you want, and you have to be willing to vote for them. And if you're willing to do neither of those things, or even just one of those things, it's not enough. And so, to your point, they're going to go for the lowest hanging fruit. That's politics. That's by definition. So I agree with you that, older Americans tend to be more reliable voters substantially. And so if you have to choose, like, fuck, I want to win an election. I mean, I suppose unless your district is so lopsided in terms of the age distribution, right, that half-hearted, Zoomers are more likely, like, you would bank on them, but that's just not how these district, states, and elections go. So I totally agree with you on that.
What do you think of the idea that, like, I think this mismatch is causing a lot of tension, because if you're a young person and a lot of what you use to engage like with politics are these social media platforms, and so you're logging into your Twitter account and you're seeing nothing but just unbridled excitement and confidence and optimism around candidates like Mamdani, which, to his credit, like I keep saying it over and over again, but I do think that he has run and is running like a really brilliant strategy. And
by definition, I mean, he was dead last, and then he won the primary, and he's almost certainly going to win the race. I mean, he's objectively, anyone who says otherwise is a fucking moron.
And he's inspired candidates like all over the country to mirror him. Now we're seeing like copycats all over the country, like Graham Plattner. This guy from Maine, I think, is definitely like using that strat. James Tallarico.
Well, Cuomo tried it. Cuomo himself tried to imitate some of the campaign strategy and marketing strategy. It just didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, like Tallarico. You remember that? Do you know who Tallarico is? This out
of Texas.
Yeah. He's doing it. Like, if you look at his campaign ads, they're very heavy on the, like, look up instead of left or right, like that kind of economic populism stuff. And so anyways, I think like this creates a perception online, and it creates a set of expectations. Like, look at, like, this is where all the excitement and the energy is. But then when you actually get these electoral results, they end up disappointing more often than not. And then there's this feeling of like being robbed. And so, like, I guess like what I'm trying to say, and then we can wrap this conversation up or whatever, if you want to give closing thoughts, is the day that I see people like Krystal and Kyle and Hassan and Emma Vigeland, the day that I see them making videos, like honestly exploring potential explanations for why they struggle with older voters and like black voters, is the day that I'm going to feel so much more optimistic about the future of progressive politics in this country. And so, like, I think I'm going to start making it a part of like my overall goals with content and political engagement, to sort of like gently nudge people in the direction of actually like doing that kind of honest accounting, because I think that will produce good outcomes if people actually really start taking those conversations seriously.
Well, and, I also think you should try to have those conversations too, and obviously you've got to find a way to do them without burning the bridge. I don't know if you've torched the bridge with. I actually, off the record, Krystal and I. You came up right before Krystal and I started recording. We were laughing. I said, "Listen," I said, "for what it's worth," because she said something about she told me something off the record about her conversation with Tommy Lauren. I said, "Well, we're not recording now." I said, "But for what it's worth, and there's a public record of this." I'm like, "I know you and Hutch have your disagreements." I'm like, "But Hutch was singing your praises and your performance against Tommy, about how good you are at your job, even though he disagrees sometimes with how you direct that energy, like against Klobuchar or whoever, not Klobuchar, Slotkin or whatever, but that you're a really good debater, really good interviewer and stuff like that." And I told her what you said about because again, it's on your video about how you would hesitate to, if Krystal was like, "I want to interview you, Hutch," how you would hesitate. You said something like that on your stream, and she laughed and she said, "Well, that's high praise. I appreciate that coming from Hutch or whatever." So I don't know if like the bridge is burned, with you all or anything else, but I would say, Like the next time we have that, the next time I have a conversation with Krystal and Kyle, where it's not about a specific event like the Tommy Lauren debate and the Sagar thing and whatever, and we have more time to like explore things. That is something I want to talk about like, you know, how is it, especially with Krystal, like how are you navigating your journalism and your advocacy with the Democratic Party? It's one of the things I try to stress with them when I talk to them. And if you actually watch the interviews, I'll say things like, you know, it's really important to give Democrats their flowers when they do things that that you like or that you're calling for. It's good to like praise this. And Kyle, I think, is pretty good about it, to try to gently nudge them in that direction too. But to the extent that you want to nudge them on certain things, I think it's important you keep that bridge. You don't go fucking nuclear in your reactions to things before you talk to them. That would be my advice to you. Like maybe keep your powder dry, try to have a conversation with them first, and then, you know, drop your video about why you think Kyle's take on this sucks. You know what I mean? Do it a bit more tactically.
Yeah, I think I've always said that Krystal is a bit of a mixed bag because in terms of like her abilities, she's pretty kind of like she's almost unrivaled. She's so clearly more polished than like 99% of creators.
Yeah, she's awesome. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I felt the same way. I mean, like, listen, I like Krystal, but the reason I like Krystal is because of the turn she's done since Trump came back to power. You know, the like where she won me over was her post-election conversation with Cenk. And I was like, okay, this is somebody that I agree with her on some things, disagree with her on others, but now I can fuck with her now in a way that I probably couldn't have before because I'm not asking her to give up, you know, her, you know, beliefs on like paid family leave and Medicare for all, or her position on Gaza and Israel. Cause you know, Mehdi Hassan has convinced me that that's a genocide now. So I'm probably more in that direction than I was previously. I'm not asking you to give up any of that, but what I am asking you to do is to recognize that the Republican Party is worse than Trump, or worse than the Democrats, excuse me, and that Trump is a unique threat. And you can still criticize Democrats constructively. We all do it, including you. But don't do this both sides are the same shit, and, you know, and downplay the threat of Trump. And she's come a long way in that respect. So I know you've always regarded her as a mixed bag too, but I would just advise you with Kyle, Krystal, and others, like I spoke with Kyle for the first time because of you, because they reached out to you. So you had the connection there. And I would just encourage you moving forward, don't kill the connection by instantly reacting to, oh, fuck this, you know, like what, like I would reach out to them first and say, hey, listen, I have some disagreements with you about some of these things. And can we have that conversation? Because you might scare them off with by going ham.
Well, I don't go super hard on them. That like Emma, I think is like much worse. But I don't know.
Me too. Yeah.
Speaking of like Krystal, when she came on, you remember, like I asked her, like I was like, you know, in terms of the future for the progressive movement, you know, what do you think, you know, if you're optimistic, like where does that optimism come from? Like, what do you think needs to change? And her answer was basically like, oh, well, the climate is different, so this time it'll be different. And so and I found that answer discouraging. Like the day that I asked that question, like, what do you think?
Were expecting what you were hoping for, and I get it, is okay, maybe the climate has changed, but what about your approach is different? Yeah. What about these progressive and that's why I think it would be worth your time. And I'm sure she would say yes. I don't know about Kyle, and Krystal didn't say anything any which way, because that wasn't like part of the conversation. But I think that would be a conversation worth having. Like, you know, that you want to really tease this out in a way where you don't have to share the conversation with 3 other co-hosts. It's just you and her having that. I'm sure she'd agree to that. I'd be surprised if she didn't. Yeah, it's probably only a matter of time.
Maybe one of these days. But yeah, no, I appreciate the conversation, brother.
Yeah, no, listen, that's why I didn't chime in that much yesterday. I mean, I spoke up a little bit. I think that I don't think the 4 of us are really that far apart. I think the big hangups were the particular issue of abortion. You know, we were not persuaded, and I'm still not persuaded that that's something we need to give ground on. Now, if in your hypothetical, the data show that is something in order to be competitive in more purple or red states and districts that we would need to, get behind pro-life candidates, I'm open to that. Now, if there was a genuine threat at that point to pro-choice policy, then I would reconsider.
Right.
It would be one of those things where it's like, yeah, we'll let them in the tent, but they're not going to get their fucking way on abortion policy. I think that was one of the hangups. And then the other hangup is, it's almost like a sliding scale. So if you move to the right to capture red states or red districts, or making even an attempt to do so, which obviously isn't guaranteed, how can you do it in a way which minimizes the risk of losing more otherwise dedicated left-wing voters? Because I do agree. I do think you can move, just like you can move too far to the left and lose potential voters on the right. Like, yeah, you almost had me, but you moved. The same way goes in the opposite direction, that if you move too much to the right, there are voters like, yeah, previously I voted for Democrats, but you guys are basically becoming Republican light, and fuck you. And I think that's something that has to be contemplated whenever we're making these decisions. We can't just be seeking to court people on the right. We need to try to court people on the right while also holding on to what we have.
Yeah, I think like what Ezra was speaking to was as much of a cultural problem within left-wing, like the entire, like the broad left-wing space in this country, as it is a political problem. Because I think what he's saying is that ideally people on the left wouldn't be depressed or wouldn't have their, they wouldn't have such a negative reaction to, a conservative Democrat like Joe Manchin winning in a state like West Virginia. I think he's saying that cultural kind of attitude of animosity towards like hypothetical conservative Democrats is like a part of the problem. Because to your point, like it might strategically make sense to, target a particularly red district with a pro-life Democrat. But I think you're correct in that you run the risk of a lot of more left-leaning people within the party feeling like the party is abandoning them, and then they don't vote in the next election. Like that is that is a legit consideration that you would have to really weigh those kinds of things. But I think what Ezra is saying is in an ideal world, those people on the left wouldn't view that as a betrayal, but just a strategic necessity in combating,
because there would be no real jeopardy to pro-life policy. Right. And no, I again, I agree. That's why for me, my only beef with Ezra's position was just the specific example he offered, not the conception behind it. Because again, as you know, as much as I bitched about Joe Manchin, I've been consistent from the very beginning on my coverage, which is that I would rather, like, it's not even a question. There's no hesitation. I would and still would rather have Joe Manchin representing West Virginia than Jim Justice, and was glad to have Joe Manchin in the Democratic caucus during the Biden administration.
So now, Sinema and Fetterman are a totally different situation, because you could replace them with Democrats that are closer towards the party, but with Manchin you just couldn't do that. So
100%, yeah. So no, I think we mostly agree on it. And again, not obviously I can't guarantee anything, but if you ever really do want to talk to Krystal about it, I'm sure you could probably get that on your own.
She followed me on Twitter, so I think I could just drop a line one of these days. Yeah, I would be open to have I would want to have a conversation about how progressives need to start changing this culture of outside blame. It really needs to change systemically, in alternative media, and I think that would make an enormous difference. So yeah.
Well, before I hop off here, the other thing I just want to remind you again, I linked you to the conversation with Tommy. I don't have a way to link you to the conversation with Mike Nellis because it has not been posted separately. It's only available as a TYT member video, but be on the lookout for it, because Mike Nellis, and this is actually, and I can definitely hook you up with this, I do think you should talk to him. Mike Nellis is, again, no frills, no nonsense. He's pretty ferocious on Piers Morgan, with Jesse Waters on Fox News, with Tommy Lauren a couple of months ago. He had a conversation that went viral, and he pushes back on Cenk a lot, much more than Tommy does in this conversation. And it's a similar conversation. Cenk wants to talk about, how the DNC primaries are rigged and whatever. And Mike, who previously worked for Bernie Sanders before going on eventually eventually to work for Kamala Harris. Is like, Cenk, nah, I'm sorry, I got to push back on this. You know, he goes, obviously, like, I agree, like super delegates, I'm glad that they're gone. That was fucked up from the beginning, blah, blah, blah. But he's like, you know, no, just Bernie lost fair and square. And that was funny because I was actually thinking of you while I was listening to that earlier today.
Is that conversation
for my videos.
Is that conversation going to go up publicly after?
Almost. I feel like it certainly will, because the one with Tommy Vitor, I'm pretty sure, was also like that. It was like a bonus episode of Pod Save or not Pod Save America, God damn it, TYT, and then they posted it separately on their TYT's The Conversation channel, and I think that's what they're going to do with Nellis.
Okay. Yeah, I just followed him on Twitter, so yeah. All right, cool. Yeah. Thanks for the heads up.
All right, bro.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. I'll talk to you later.
All right, bye-bye. Do you guys know what I mean? Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Bad company with $10. Newsom is everything Pisco wants Democrats to be, yet the progressives hate him. I don't get why he continues to run with the progressives should lead the way. I think it's because he just wants to see progressive policy, which makes sense. Like, so do I. But I feel like if you talk to a lot of progressives, there's certainly a lot of progressives in Pisco's chat when we're doing Live and Learn, like, these people are so convinced that I am like trying to undermine progressives. Like, the chat is like it's very divisive. The chat is very divisive. And I think it's Pisco's chat. I could be wrong. And maybe because he does collaborations with Straighter Aid, and she's definitely further left of me. I'm going to have another conversation with her soon. We just got to set up a time. And it's just not true. Like, the reason why I'm so critical of the progressive movement right now is because I want like success. It should make people angry. The idea that so many, and it's true, like so many progressive policies poll really well, like insanely well. And yet we don't see a lot of electoral success, or the kind of electoral success we would need to see for these policies to for these policy goals to eventually become like codified, like law. We're just not even anywhere close to the numbers that we need to pass big bold policy, progressive policies. That should make people upset. That should anger people. Which, to be fair, I think it does. But what happens with that anger is it's all placed on external forces. They're angry at the billionaires and AIPAC and the system, and like there's no anger about like, what the fuck, man? Why can we not run winning campaigns? Like, what is happening? How can we connect with more voters? There's none of that kind of anger. There's none of that like reflective anger, and that's a problem. It's a big problem. It's not going to change until that changes. And I'm not even saying you should never talk about like the donors. I'm not saying that. But if it's all you're saying, if there's no, I mean, I was thinking about it this week, and I don't know if I ever thought about it in this way, but I don't know if I've ever seen a period of reflection after an electoral loss for a progressive candidate. Have you guys ever seen it, like literally a single time? So when like Katie Porter loses, or Nina Turner loses, or Jamal Bowman loses, or Cori Bush loses, or Bernie loses both the primaries in 2016 and 2020, I don't think I've literally ever one single time heard from a progressive commentator in the alternative media space some kind of attempt to unpack like, okay, what demographics did we struggle with, and what can we do in the future to none of that. Art of Aaron, you say you've seen it. I'm so plugged into politics. I've been so plugged into politics for years, and I've never seen it. It just doesn't happen. I've heard Hassan talk about Bernie's issues connecting with black voters a bunch. Credit where credit's due. If that's the case, then okay, that's good to know. But I don't think it changes my point. Like very broadly speaking, you just don't really see it. You just don't really see it. So progressives are losing because they don't self-reflect after elections. I think that's a big part. Yeah, it's a huge part of why and it's not like they don't win elections, but they've just kind of stagnated. If progressive policies are as popular as they are in the polls consistently, for the most part, with like some exceptions, right? You should theoretically see progressive candidates like doing a lot better in terms of winning primaries and these kinds of things. And I think a big part of the reason, in fact, the main reason they don't have more electoral success is because there is not, in terms of like culturally in the progressive movement across commentators and candidates and politicians, it's like a big systemic problem. There's this avoidance of that conversation. You avoid the conversation by blaming AIPAC. So how the fuck are you supposed to get into, like, how am I supposed to have confidence that the progressives are going to be serious about like attacking these demographic shortfalls if they're not even having the conversation? Why would I expect anything to change?